they're ancestors of this place and land. I've heard various versions of honoring the Anishinaabe, and one that really struck the core to me was that it is stolen land, and we need to be conscientious of that in the sense of beginning to learn various ways to take it in and realize what is it that we can start building these relationships and balancing and being more inclusive. So, so I put that out there for you to think about, and we will continue to do this as we start our meetings in honoring the Anishinaabe. Okay. This is 2 of 7 core values, and in which I mentioned in my overview of the agenda. And one that we put a lot of emphasis on is that we're nonpartisan. And we are, and I'm not going to read this, but we are open and inclusive. And it doesn't make any difference on where you live or who you are or anything like that, but we continue to work with elected officials and community leaders across the political spectrum. And often there is a misunderstanding that we are only nationally focused. And as our chapter, we're very active both at the local and state level. So there are people here on tonight that are doing that kind of work. And I just want to reemphasize that. The second one, diversity, is very similar, that we empower people in exercising their personal and political power, regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, ability, social economic factors, or political affiliation. And we seek to support people and elevate their voices. And I think that's important because of all that has been happening in the last year, that we are becoming much more conscious of our need to widen our diversity in organizations. Okay, thank you. All right. Just to welcome all of you. You have hectic schedules, many choices, and we are so glad that you joined us tonight. Chris is going to take that screen off, and for anyone that is new, does anyone would they like to either, or been only once or twice or whatever, would you like to say anything at all tonight?
If no one else is going to talk, I am more than happy to say something.
Okay, good, Andrew.
Well, I'm still fairly new. I remember being in this meeting three meetings ago, and then unfortunately the past 2 I wasn't able to participate. But I am originally a landscape photographer, nature photographer at heart, and for the past 10 years. And after seeing the seasons literally almost daily, I have been able to see the impacts of the later seasons, the drier winters for sure. I'm originally from Chicago, and it just got me going and got me interested in climate change in general. And the more I got into it, the more I realized how much I was passionate about it. And I mean, I just, started to look at groups and organizations and found this place. So
okay. Thank you very much. We're honored to have you choose us. It's great.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, by the way, the volunteer, that website, Volunteer Match, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I have tried to message you guys many times, and
doesn't work, huh?
In your respect, I for some reason that website, just in general, no one responds back. So I'm glad to finally be able to be a part of this organization without just getting straight.
Yes. So. Well, we need to know about that. Why you aren't getting a response, or why we aren't getting your messages, obviously, because We try our best. We
No,
really do.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying anything like that. It's just like they have, I don't know, just some events 2 years ago that they had that looked interesting, but
Okay, good.
I- but
All right. Anyone else? Zoe? Is it Zoe or Zoe?
It's Zoe. I've
Okay.
been to a few meetings so far, mostly like events with the Holland one and this one. But I first heard about you guys through my advanced environmental studies class at Aquinas College. So I'm currently, well, just started this week doing stream research with my professor. So very into the environmental impacts of that. And I just love going to your guys' meetings and hopefully can be more involved.
Well, we love having you here. So thanks so much for that. So Peg, did you want to say anything?
I guess I think what's brought me to your organization and to many causes in the environmental stage, a lot of it had to do with the conversation I had with my daughter a couple of years ago. We were talking about her possibly having children. And she said, why? There's no point in having children because the world's just going to be shot in 10 years. And I looked over at her and it felt like a black cloud had just descended on the two of us. And there shouldn't be that kind of bitterness in the voice of a beautiful 22-year-old. So I figured I got to make up for my generation.
Well, that's a very pertinent story, very touching. And I think that many of us on this screen feel that way. And I can say that that's why I'm in CCL and have stayed, because it gives me hope to be working with fantastic people. And we do have a great group of people to work together. So Cam and Amy, do you guys want to say anything? No, they may be eating dinner or something. I know I do that sometimes when they're on Zoom meetings. So, and I think Mike Jones was up in the corner with the phone. Mike, are you on? Can you hear me? No? Okay. All right, good. Well,
Hello, hello.
Okay, you have been, is this Mike Jones on the phone?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Do you want to say anything? I know you've been with us a couple of times. And
I've actually become more active, and I particularly am interested in this session tonight. I think the power of the drain commissioners is not recognized at all. And they answer to no one but the voters. So,
Yep.
And I've been interested in the environment for a long time. I'm very sorry that more people our generation have been not very interested, but that's the way it is, and I hope we can turn it around. I don't think it's going to be very easy, though.
Well, there's a lot of good people working on it, and I try to tell my friends that there are incredible numbers of things that are going on, and that's where we get our hope at every level. So thank you for sharing that, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yep.
I'm going to quickly just introduce, there's only of us co-leads. John is off on a family trip to Philly area to see his son Liam. And so I'm, of course, Jan, I'm one of the co-leads. We are one of the 5 teams of chapter development. We do the programming, we do a lot of the members stuff. There's a lot of things that we do. So there's 4 of us. And John Constantine is usually here. He's the one that's gone tonight. But Dolly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dolly Lutz, and my focus has really been with grassroots, with the monthly calling campaign. And I will say it another time, which is if you're not part of the monthly calling campaign, please consider joining. It is one of the easiest things that you can do that will have the biggest impact. And especially with Peter Meyer for Michigan District 3, he's actually listening to us. So the more calls he gets that says we need to do something about climate change and the Energy Innovation Act, please sign on. I think we're going to increase our chances that he's actually going to do it. The other thing that we've been working on, I think this is when you want me to do it, is that we have formed a subcommittee, environmental justice subcommittee. And one of the really exciting things that the committee has done, we talked about it a little bit earlier, is Michigan just had its first environmental justice summit, a 3-day conference that we've spent a whole lot of time on Zoom in the last 3 days. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. There were many, many, many wonderful sessions. And I'm so impressed that they already have them ready and up. So you can go out there and look at all the sessions and just pick and choose what you would like to listen or watch. I'm really excited about what Michigan is putting in place. And I think we're being pretty cutting edge from what I was hearing compared to what's happening in other states. So that also gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you, Dolly. You just did your reporting, so you probably won't need to report.
Oh, okay, great. That's everything.
That's all right. That's all right. If you have anything else to say under that part, you can. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Barsy-Eckman, and I co-lead, I help with the newsletter and overall chapter support stuff.
She's a big support. She does all the IT stuff for us. So, okay, so we're going to move into if any questions. Everybody okay? We're going to move into a very short video and go from there into our report.
Supporting climate policies like the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act puts us on the right path to drastically reduce carbon production, address environmental injustice, and transition to clean energy alternatives. Climate change is the biggest national security threat of our life. We're witnessing the harmful effects, raging wildfires, rising sea levels, and more frequent hurricanes devastating our coast, and it's our responsibility to provide a safe, sustainable environment for everyone today, for our children and grandchildren, and forever. I've spent my career as an elected official in the California State Assembly, the Los Angeles City Council, and as a member of Congress, advocating and pushing for cleaner air, safe drinking water, and renewable energy. For too long, the poorest communities and working families have had the burden of living next to the polluting factories, landfills, and contaminated lands. I support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act because it is the type of ambitious climate action we need right now to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, avoid the disproportionate impacts on our vulnerable communities, and help us meet our pollution reduction goals. Climate crisis is real, and we can do more to better address the tremendous challenges of the climate crisis now, before the damage and devastation is irreversible. I encourage my fellow colleagues all the time to join us and support this bill, which will benefit all American families and future generations to come. Supporting climate policies like the Energy Innovation and Carbon.
Okay.
So really quick, is it just me that moved the cursor to get the cursor out of the way and realized that it wasn't mine?
No, you're not alone, Andrew. Yeah. Yeah, it's an automatic reflex. All right. So reports. So I've already kind of explained that we consist of 5 teams. Not all chapters have 5 teams because they're smaller and don't have the ability to do that, or they have 5 teams and then they only have 1 person in each team, or they operate differently. But we're so fortunate that we have enough people and we've been able to develop this 5-team structure that is nationally followed with CCL. First report, lobby team. is Mindy, and she's going to report on the House legislative meetings.
Thanks, Jan. I also, before I get started, I just want to make sure that everybody knows about this upcoming event, especially Ken. The WEGI Speaker Series is featuring Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. I know how much Ken loved that book. So she's going to be speaking next Thursday, I think it is, and it's free to sign up. I can put that in the chat if anybody doesn't know about it. So.
Let me make one sub comment to that, Mindy. Tom actually informed us because we had a screen for signing up and actually notifying it, but there's 1,500 people that have signed up for it.
Wow.
And we're not sure if it's closed yet, but go ahead if you're interested and try to get on, because she is quite, it will be very interesting.
Yeah, I just knew that it meant a lot to Ken, so I wanted to make sure he knew about it. I'm not going to be able to attend, but anyway, I'll put that in the chat. As far as lobby teams go, we have a meeting for during lobby week in June with Peter Meyer. So excited about that. Unfortunately, they're only giving us 15 minutes to speak to him, but we're going to get to speak to him. So that's good. Because we have such limited time, I think we're going to have Lisa Del Bono do the En-ROADS presentation. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's very persuasive tool that I think it was developed by MIT, but I can look that up. If you Google that, you'll see it, En-ROADS, EN-ROADS. And it'll bring up this simulator that shows you what happens to atmospheric carbon when you do different types of activities. And the bottom line is, without a price on carbon, none of this stuff is going to get us to where we need to go. So it's a very persuasive tool to look at. So we're hoping that he'll think so too. We're going to show him that when we meet with him on June 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I only have a couple of comments in regards to Senator Peters. First of all, I want you guys to really know that Grand Rapids and Holland and Grand Haven really scored in getting people out to hear Senator Peters on last week, Friday. Grand Rapids had the highest number of registrations of people from our area from the whole state of all the chapters. We have 23 chapters, mind you, in the state. And that covers Lansing and Ann Arbor, and 3 chapters in Detroit, and on and on and on, Mount Pleasant. We topped it. And for even Holland had 23 registrations. That's more, it's almost, like 4th in line to all of the other chapters. And even Grand Haven, as a brand new chapter, had 13 registrations. So I'm just thrilled. So I just like, good job, you guys, in attending and showing up or getting your friends to, or whatever you did was great. And they're on record, 195 people attended, but there were a number of people that were 2s in the screen, you know how that is. So they don't count the second person. So we know we had over 200 people. We had 150 people for Stabenow meeting last fall. So for Peters to make a presentation of 200 people from CCL, that is a great presentation. So congratulations. And that's all I wanted to say. So I'm going to move to the next team, media. Media is made up of 2 different teams, sub-team part. The first part, media, David had to work tonight, and he's ahead of the publication type part of the team. And he's always looking for anybody that's interested in doing any kind of writing or publication, even for online news like Bridge or other ones. And Because we have M Live, and it is very challenging to have M Live as a news piece. He has been in touch and connection with Garrett, who is ahead of the environmental piece of M Live, and certainly has been trying to work with him. Of course, M Live covers other areas of the state. So that's what David does. He's met with Holland and Grand Haven because they have independent news and they have columns and they're able to get articles in. So they're kind of working together on ideas on how they can do this. And I'm going to let Chris talk about social media.
So social media, so for us, that's Facebook, Twitter, and we also have an Instagram account. I just want to say that CCL National really is pushing and asking people to really tap into social media. Our legislatures all have accounts in social media. That's a great way to reach out to them. For the past couple months, they've been pushing for having social media events. Just recently to write our congressman. We did postcards to President Biden. We did the bulletin board to Senator Stabenow. So, and tweeting thanks to our to representatives who co-sponsor on the bill. So I just encourage, if you have a social media account, please follow us and follow CCL National. Thanks.
Okay, good. So we're moving on to grassroots. Grassroots and times when we can be face-to-face, used to do a lot of tabling, presentations, and a lot of those kinds of activities. Instead, we, as Dolly already kind of introduced and talked about, she's in charge of the calling campaign. Shirley's been working with her on that. And we have a pretty good record within the state, don't we? On the number of people that are participating. It's just not at the level that you would like to have it, right?
Correct. I have high standards. I know that.
Yeah, but we're doing okay. And many of you wrote letters the other day when I sent out an email in regards to writing letters to legislators, but it was actually for the House to support the bill. Thank you very much for doing that too. I'm going to skip on in regards to the Michigan Environmental Justice Conference. Dolly's already spoke about it and kind of given an overview. We're going to have, she put in the chat, the actual link in which you can listen to some of the recordings. They are excellent. If you've got time, most of them were what, an hour, I mean, a half hour to an hour. There's one that was yesterday on Wednesday, the Tribal Council leaders, which was fabulous. If you really want to be informed about sovereignty and tribes and treaties and what they deal with, go on and click on that. It was, I'm trying to remember what time of day it was, but you'll see it. It will be, there will be a heading in regards to tribal. Certainly, I learned a great deal from it, and every one of them, even ones that I didn't think were that great, I still learned something from them. So, okay. Any other comments that anybody want to make about the conference? Just quick.
I just want to say one thing because I fell down on my job here,
You
which
did
was
fine.
I was supposed to keep up with chat and I didn't. And we had called on Amy and she didn't respond, but she responded in the chat and she
Okay.
said her microphone isn't working well. But she wanted to say that she appreciates the work that we do and that she runs the green team at Kent District Library.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
so one of the reasons she's here is she wants to stay aware of community efforts. So thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Amy. Okay, I'm going to move into grass tops. I've been kind of leading grass tops for the last few years, and I sort of had a kind of epiphany. I don't know, it just sounds like the same old stuff, but in which we really need to look at grass tops as being something, not just us who are on the team and how we work together in groups of specific groups, but also every one of you actually can have a connection from a grass top standpoint. And what that means is you know people that are influential in the community that you can ask them to support or endorse the bill. People who support, and I'm going to have Chris pull up what I'm talking about very quickly, and you can find this by going into Energy Innovation Act.org, and you can see these screens. And the first screen here is there's a difference between supporters and endorsers. Supporters are all of the various, supporters could be you and me, whether you have letters behind your name or not. You can go in and support and show that you support the bill and what the bill has to say, and what we're all about in CCL. Then there are the influential people, which some of you are influential people. You have letters behind your name. You're either an emeritus, professors, or you whatever. We have a number of people like that that are in our chapter. And you can go on and sign the document to support the bill and have your name down. So you can see also, so there's the endorsers, and this is national numbers, okay? And Chris, I'm going to have you go into the actual screen where it shows the categories at the top. So if you can slide it back down very quickly, where there's the I want you to go into the map and the different categories of the supporters. So actually click on the that's the categories, but I want the categories across on the bar. All right, here's the map. So if you go into the map part of this, you can see how many endorsers each district has. Now, right now, we have at least what they have record here, that we only have 10 endorsers. So we have a lot of work to do within our district. Now, we're district of Peter Myers, District 3, but District 2, some of you are in District 2, too. It depends on how the line's drawn. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring this to your attention. About what the map is and how to look at this. If you go back into the top and click on the supporters right there. Oh, that just brings us back to the other part. Okay. And then let's go into actually endorsing the bill, the statement. Okay. Yeah, there it is. That's what I wanted to see.
Oh, you wanted that. Sorry.
Well, yeah. Back. I wanted you to all to see the categories across on the blue bar there. Those are the various categories in which people have signed on. They're representing in different ways. The grass top, I only want to point this out is because the grass top team is set up in various categories like this. There's 2 of us or 1 of us representing different categories in which we're working on trying to find influential people to endorse the bill. And then there is an online form which you can go on and you can sign up, okay? And there it is, endorse the energy innovation carbon dividend. That's the form. All right. That's all I wanted to say about that in the sense of knowing how to see the information on the bill, the details, who's endorsing, who's supporting, and how you can sign on. If you know people of either in interfaith standpoint, not from that standpoint, or ahead of particular organizations, you name it. You see the categories, you'll understand it clearly, what we're talking about. Okay. All right.
So Jan, it's already 7:03. Do you
Yeah.
zip through or?
I'm going to zip through announcements. Okay. We're done with reports. And let's go to the screen on announcements. I'm just going to take you through this really quick. All right, so there's a virtual film. There's a link in the chat, and we will make that possible for you. That's being shown. This is a very interesting film about one of the Pacific islands that are totally losing their land by being engulfed by the waters. So I highly recommend this. This is being put on by the Asian Pacific Action Team at a national level. And one of the persons who is ahead of that team is from our Ann Arbor chapter. And she was honored as a volunteer on the national homepage. So if you pull that up, you'll see Nadine's photo. The next one going across to the right is the big conference coming up. Michigan Climate and Energy, which is excellent. It's going to be another 3-day conference. Cathy had put out that she had a free ticket because it does cost money on that one. Down carbon pricing panel that's being put on by Ann Arbor on June 1st. This is their chapter's activity. This is going to be an interesting debate on various types of pricing carbon, not focused just on the CCL support of the House bill. The one to the right, we put voters, not politicians, in this because this is very, very important. We're now to the point of Michigan's redistricting. And you can go on to votersnotpoliticians.org and make public comments about your area and your community. They've got it very well organized. And I was impressed. And this is the time, this is really important as they are reconfiguring the districts. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. Down at the Climate Resolution Coalition, that is going to be our feature on our June meeting, besides the conference, the national conference, and additional, which I am going to, with the vote of the other co-leads, going to add on what is happening within the Grand Rapids City. Listen to Allison Sutter yesterday, an incredible presentation. And we will share the specific things that she's working on. She's the Director of Sustainability for the City of Grand Rapids. Okay, so you see those things? Let's go to the next quick one, the last screen, and then we'll move into the program. This is our national conference information. I encourage every one of you to sign up. This is going to be Saturday and Sunday, starting on June 12th. And what's really cool about this, they're not using Zoom. They're going, now some of you tech people will know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I only know the name of it. It's called Air Meet, and they're going to use that platform instead. And Air Meet means that you can go and flow from session to session. You don't have to have certain time periods. You can move in and sit around a table and talk to people and get to know people. I mean, it sounds really cool. So, pardon me, it's called Air Meet.
Air.
A like air, we breathe. AIR like meet, I meet you. Okay. And they're going to have more information on it, but this is free. So go on and sign up, get your name on it, and then you can take whatever time period you want to be and participate with it on live. Of course, it's all recorded, so you can watch it later, but it's so much nicer to be there and involved in the actual live type stuff. All right, that's all I'm going to say. And Cathy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks everybody for being here. And I see our two panelists are on now. When Jan asked me to, well, first of all, I'm on the Grass Tops Committee representing agriculture. I have a small farm that I'm trying to improve our soil. And this year we have 200 chickens and lots of fun things. But when she asked me to think about who might be a speaker for tonight, the first two people that popped into my head were Mark Ludwig and Andrew Nowicki. Both of them ran for drain commissioner in rural counties this last election. Andrew in Livingston and Mark in Allegan. Mark is also a farmer, and Andrew works as an environmental educator. And even though they aren't drain commissioners, they have great ideas. I followed both of their campaigns, and they had a strong environmental focus and, you know, related to climate change and regenerative agriculture and all the things we're interested in. So a lot of people don't know what drain commissioners do, and I never did either. So Andrew and Mark are ready to give you their presentation, and they'll be open for lots of questions at the end. Go ahead.
Thank you, Cathy. Mark here. I'm going to try to screen share now. God help us all. see what happens. Oh gosh, this might work.
All right. Hello, everybody. Is my mic working okay? I wanted to, it looks like it is. Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay, let me make it work. Come on.
Oh, I did forget. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that Mark is the vice chair and former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party Rural Caucus. And Andrew is the chair of the Environmental Caucus. Thank you.
All right, everybody see the screen? Did it come up?
Yep.
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Well, as Cathy said, Andrew and I ran for Drain Commissioner, and I titled this presentation, Michigan Drain Commissioners, Leaders on Climate Action question, because I think some of them are great leaders on it, and some of them are kind of ignoring it. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of power there, which could be doing a lot of good. The Drain Commissioner office in Michigan is really uniquely powerful. There's very low barriers to undertaking projects. You basically have to have a couple of buddies who are willing to petition for a project. In addition to having the power to initiate projects, they have taxing authority to pay for them and significant flexibility in who they tax and how much they tax. In addition, they have bonding authority and a rather broad mandate to serve the public good. And really, Michigan needed it. At European settlement, basically everything south of Clare was a big swamp in Michigan. And there are many other reasons of soils and topography that really make this an important office to live the kind of life that we live in Michigan. If you are interested in the details, and I am not going to go down all the rabbit hole, I would suggest having a look at the Michigan Association of County Drain Commissioners website. There's this nice fact page on there that will tell you the details of what we're talking about here, but I think suffice to say that it's a very powerful office and it's something the environmental community should be much more engaged on. I don't think this is a hard sell here, but climate change really demands more action, both in the form of infrastructure preparedness and keeping things repaired and of a size to match the kind of precipitation events we're dealing with. We need to consider things like the fact that our weather systems don't move like they used to. Many times they stall and kind of park themselves in place for long periods of time. We're experiencing that now in a drought system across Michigan. And we experience it sometimes in a rain system where rains just pound away for hours or days at a time. Look at the two Houston hurricanes in recent times that just devastated those areas. And really everybody's going to get a turn. Many of us know much of our infrastructure is in very poor condition. And, God bless the Biden administration. They seem to really be taking this seriously. And one of the things we should be looking at as engaged people is making sure that these infrastructure dollars are being spent properly, and that frankly the infrastructure is durable enough for the realities we're facing. One reason to think about focusing on drain commissioners is because legislatures are often infested with climate denial, or people who consider it a low priority. Particularly one of our parties just really doesn't seem to get it. Drain commissioners, there aren't a lot of votes taken. There's not, if your drain commissioner is on board with addressing climate change, you're done for 4 years in your county. That individual can move forward without having very many barriers to moving things along. Certainly both Andrew and I focused our drain commissioner races on the climate issues. I guess the nice thing is drain commissioners don't have to talk about abortions or guns or race or so many of the other issues that frequently may make people unwilling to vote for a progressive candidate. But perhaps with the drain issue, we've just got to talk about the climate issue. We can cut a lot of the rest of politics loose. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, if you just want to say slide when you want me to advance, I'll go ahead and kind of drive
good.
for
So I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of bringing together why this all matters, because what I encountered a lot on the campaign trail is that when people hear that you're running for drain commissioner, the first question they ask is like, what does it do? Which I think Mark kind of covered quite a bit, but also like, why does it matter? Well, why does it make a difference? And if I vote for this person or this person, and what does a drain commissioner office really do? And my focus in my professional life has really been wildlife. And I found that when I talk to a lot of communities about wildlife, we tend to have this idea in our head of going out like into a big wilderness space. So I like this photo because it really captures where I think people look at Michigan as being the wilderness area. But wildlife in reality is all around us all the time. And so these projects really are well placed to be able to create these spaces and such that wildlife need, while also providing things for people. So slide. And this is a big deal because wildlife is absolutely in a crisis. There are a lot of things that we're managing very well in the state. If you look at like bass populations, deer, wild turkey, a lot of the game wildlife, when we invest resources and infrastructure into maintaining a species and making sure it's going to be around forever, humans are able to do that. But the things that we're not paying attention to, we're losing at these really quite insane numbers. So in the last 50 years, a couple of stats to have on hand, about 50% less fish in the ocean, about 45% less invertebrate life. That's less insects, bees, butterflies, those types of things. 3 billion less birds, and a steady decline of amphibians that's averages at about 3.79% per year decline. And it's just continuing to go down and down and down. And when a lot of times we talk about these issues, I feel like they're often framed in terms of something very far away, like we're thinking about the rainforest or the animals in Africa. But there are animals right here in Michigan that need our help too. And we're losing those just as fast as these other animals too. So next slide. And oftentimes when I get into these discussions politically, people kind of try to trap it in terms of do I prioritize the economy or do I prioritize the environment? And that question itself is just a complete false fabrication. It doesn't exist because the economy actually exists inside the environment. So saying that you prioritize the economy over it would be like saying I prefer the filling more than I prefer the pie. So smart management and integrated management, you really have to look at the bigger picture and look at not only, is the wildlife good for wildlife's sake, but what is the wildlife doing in this community that is going to be important? And I'm going to touch on that really soon. Next slide. And that's because human problems are also wildlife problems. So if I have a river that is contaminated and the fish aren't able to live in it and the frogs aren't able to live in it, those same health problems are going to be going on and affecting people. And when we remove habitat from wildlife, we're also creating these actual problems that are fueling into things in our communities, which are again going back right onto people. So what's interesting about this is that it kind of works both ways, where when we harm the environment, we're harming the capacity for wildlife to make more of itself. But if we make better structures for our wildlife in our communities, we can also improve human health at the same time. So next slide. And especially I want to touch on that there are certain types of wildlife that I would focus on more when I'm looking at a project. And these are the environmental indicator species. This is like the canary in the coal mine, because they are the animals that are going to be first affected by toxins that can then later go on and affect humans. So pictured here on the left is a northern leopard frog. And on the right, that is a species of mayfly. Sometimes people also call them fish flies, but in entomology terms, it's actually a different group than that. And these are both environmental indicators because when there's pollution in the water, they're going to be one of the first things that get hit. And so they're going to start declining in that area. And this happens before you reach levels that are high enough, they start triggering EPA monitoring and out of compliance for people. So we can actually learn a little bit about the health of our rivers and our ecosystem just by looking for the presence of certain key species like leopard frogs and like diversities of mayflies. Next slide. And at the same time, these wetlands are providing a bunch of ecological services for us for free. This is things that the wetland and the habitat does that when you take it away, it becomes really apparent. But often I think our communities, we kind of take it for granted when we're not thinking about, its function and its use, because we're very used to this like dollars and cents way of validating things. And, we don't necessarily pay to go outside, and breathe air and so forth. And one of the things that wetlands do is they sequester floodwater, and they also filter water as pollutants are running through it. They also do a couple other really cool things, like they can clean the air. If you have a large wetland area, it can actually reduce the velocity of storms, which is really important in preventing like coastal erosion in certain areas. And these issues, we don't really see them when they're there, but when you have an area, you can go to the next slide here from here. When you take away those services, suddenly that's when you start to get problems. This is when the wetland that used to be sequestering your floodwater is gone. Now you've got flooding, and these issues kind of exacerbate on top of each other. And I wanted to point this out too, that changes near a habitat alter the life within that habitat. So this is not a scenario where you should look at things in patches where as long as I have a preserve in this location, it's going to provide for everything all around it. Because if you have any degradation in part of that picture, it's going to be impacting the wildlife within that area. So this study actually found that I'm referencing here, that if you make a severe change in a landscape within 1.25 miles of a wetland, you can directly impact the types of things that live on the wetland, even if you didn't actually touch the wetland itself. So coming into not just the Drain Commission, but to anything that we do that has to do with management, looking at that bigger picture and knowing that anything that we change is going to affect things in the surrounding area. Next slide. And so going on to where this is really impacting people, I showed you those numbers that we're losing wildlife at this alarming rate, and look at the areas in which we're losing wetlands in Michigan. So this is not only a contribution to habitat loss for animals, but those ecosystem services that I talked about that would really prepare us for the brunt of climate change by filtering our water, by sequestering our precipitation and our stormwater, we're losing those services. All right, you can go to the next one. And in return, we're replacing them with these habitats. So I've pictured here as just like a plain green lawn in a backyard somewhere that doesn't really provide a lot of habitat value. It doesn't really provide a lot of like nutrient value. It doesn't provide any floodwater retention value. So to start to think about the landscape in terms of, what is this really doing for people and what is it really doing for wildlife? And I personally, I don't find the plain lawn to be a very aesthetically a pleasing thing to look at either. Next slide. So this is a photo from Lansing. I actually got my undergraduate degree at MSU, Michigan State University in East Lansing. And this happened the year after I got my degree. They had such severe flooding from the river there that there were students who were actually orphaned in their cars, and people had to go out in boats to go and rescue them. So these things are all affecting our communities all over the place. When we had the dam break in Midland just a couple of years ago. So this is a very real problem that's facing municipalities all over the place. And the Drain Commission is really in the best position, arguably, to be able to assist with these problems and solving them. Go to the next slide. And so this is starting to get some attention. It's not just me and Mark saying this stuff. There's articles you can go onto online that go into a lot more details and the informations of this. But wetlands and, really not just wetlands, wildlife habitat are really a key to mitigating these damages and also the damages from climate change. Next slide. And one of the things that I want to touch on too, so non-point solution sources. Sorry.
Sorry, my bad.
Oh, no, next slide too. I do want to see that. Yep, this is Lake Erie. I'm sure many of you are familiar. So the eutrophication, which is when you have a lot of non-point source pollution, this is nitrates and phosphates and other pollutants. Sometimes salt is a non-point source. Anything that is on the landscape that runs down into the rivers and into the lakes is considered a non-point pollution source. And being Drain Commissioner, you're managing essentially the flow of the water through that county in that area. So you're looking at all these different non-point pollution sources and where they're going. So for the EPA's water limit for nitrates, this is used as fertilizer. They have a 10 parts per million drinking water limit. That means that if you have more than 10 parts per million in your water, that's considered unsafe by the EPA for drinking. And there are many areas that have reached points higher than that where there's had to be action and people have gone without drinking water for a period of time. But I want to point out that I talked about those environmental indicator species, and that even if we don't reach that 10 parts per million for where it's damaging to people, it's going to be affecting the wildlife and things in that area at lower concentrations than that before it reaches something crucial like people. And again, one of the other ecosystem services that wetlands and forests and large fields provide is the sequestering of pollution and also the soaking up of these different nitrates and phosphates so it doesn't flow and become contaminated in the drinking water. Next slide. So to review a little bit, so drain projects can improve water quality. They can sequester floodwater. They add recreational value. They can provide habitat for wildlife, and you can combat the effects of climate change. And you can do all of this without directly being involved with the legislature, and there's certain abilities to levy taxes and such too. So the Drain Commission is a very powerful position to enact environmental changes. And next, I want to go over a couple examples of where these kinds of things have made impacts. You can go to the next slide. This is Tollgate Wetlands in Lansing. This is a wetland that was constructed as a Drain Commission project. And this is a picture actually of a ruby-crowned kinglet. It's a small species of bird, actually one of the smallest in the state. They're really little insect eaters. I took this picture actually a couple weeks ago by visiting Tollgate. So it's got lots of wildlife. The blue-winged teal photo that I had in the last slide is from Tollgate as well. And you see people, using this area recreationally. They're going down there with their bikes, and there's people jogging. There's people like me who are bird nerds who are out there taking photos of animals. But really what this wetland was put in there to do was to soak up excess non-point sources of pollution and manage the water levels by soaking up that extra flood water for the area. So this is a functional wetland that's also doing all these other benefits for the community. And it was absolutely a Drain Commission project. Next slide. Another project, the Detroit Riverwalk, which adds a little bit more of what, this is what the ecosystem actually looked like in Detroit if you go back before settlement and before all the buildings and such were there. And Detroit's getting flooding problems along the coast because there used to be all this wetland there. They used to soak up all the water. And of course they've got, contamination issues and such too. And wetlands are being used not just at the Riverwalk, but at other areas along Detroit to provide for all these services and also create a great outdoor recreational experience. Next slide. And the last one, also that these projects not only have to be funded through the taxpayers that are there in the area as well. There's a lot of projects in the state that could go into this, but you can get grant money and such too that qualifies for more large scale restoration projects to be able to get some of these things done. And again, if I was not involved in the political process and I was just going for a walk in these areas, I probably would have no idea that the Drain Commission was responsible for restoring this area and making this opportunity there for me. And I think that bringing awareness to these issues and also the importance of the Drain Commission can really help highlight, this is a powerful office. It can do a lot of awesome things. All right, next slide. And next, before we transition back to Mark, I wanted to touch briefly on this cool tool called Geographic Information Systems, GIS. This is essentially map making and analysis from satellite data. And this is becoming very accessible to the general public as well as to scientists and such too. So I wanted to point out that QGIS, it's literally called QGIS, is a free program. You can download it. It doesn't cost anything. It's like Open Office. And you can go on to the USGS website and all these different, NOAA has a lot of really great data. And you can download map data for a community and start analyzing this information to be able to help with projects. So the image that I have on here is actually a screenshot from one of my projects on QGIS. And I've got a land cover file pulled up here so you can look up what the different land covers are for the area. But if you go to the next slide, Where this starts to become really important for someone running for Drain Commission is you can take a closer look at where these drains are located and the way that water is flowing through the landscape. And you can start overlaying these maps with land cover data, with precipitation data, and start to identify where are areas that we could start creating new projects that can start to do all these benefits and things that I was noticing before. This particular map, this isn't going to be available on every county. This is from where I ran for Drain Commission. This is from Livingston County. And he's actually got a pretty intricate set of maps up there. Not every county does this necessarily. So you can actually see exactly where the water flows and the direction of it. If we go to the next slide. This is a pretty low resolution map, but you can get much more higher resolution for this if you were looking at a specific project. But there are projections for precipitation going forward into the future. So we know that we're getting more precipitation in these areas. We're getting more rain. And not just more rain averaging over the entire year, but more rain events where you get a whole lot of rain in one chunk, and that's where you get a lot of flooding problems and such that happen. And scientists have come up with ways to predict this. And that data is all out there, and it's all free and available for people to use. And again, it doesn't cost anything. You can use QGIS and start doing analysis with this and looking at what areas within a certain drain project are going to be experiencing more precipitation and about how much you might expect over a longer period of time. Next slide. Oh, last slide. Did it freeze or did I freeze?
I don't know why it's not advancing. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah,
okay.
I had to mute myself. Maybe I screwed something up.
It's all right. Well, the next slide, I actually was going to transition more.
There you go.
There we go. So Mark can talk about this, I'm sure, a lot more than I can. But this is also a really good tool for using to look at buffer strips in different agricultural areas. So what a buffer is, in a general sense, is it's just like a highlight around a certain area on a map. But buffers can be used to prevent the non-point pollution sources from spilling into a waterway. So you're putting in extra plants and such that are going to be able to soak up all that things and pollution and such before it goes into the water, which can be really important. And also looking at what areas, how to farm more effectively without releasing those kinds of chemicals and such too. So GIS is a really powerful tool. QGIS is free. And I'm going to leave it to Mark to talk more about the subject and go on some other topics.
All right, thank you, Andrew. See if I can make this thing behave. Right. There we go. I've been a board member or an employee of the Allegan Conservation District for, gosh, probably a dozen years now, and very involved with agriculture, both as a professional and as somebody who works with farmers. Agriculture is a very dominant land use in many of our areas of Michigan, and many farms are highly reliant on the public drainage system to really be able to do their job. In fact, I would say if anybody in your area is likely to know who the drain commissioner is and know him by name, it's probably your area farmers. One of the things I ran on, and one of the things that I would love to see some drain commissioners do, is to use their taxing authority to lean on those farmers who have poor soil practices and essentially to make soil erosion expensive. One of the rather insidious things to come out of soil science is this idea of T, tolerable soil loss. This idea that we can lose a certain number of tons per acre annually and maintain soil productivity. And a lot of our assumptions about how agriculture should be run kind of revolve around that idea of T. T is a terrible idea. This idea of tolerable soil loss, it really kind of got us where we are today. That said, many people are breaking with the past this idea that soil erosion is tolerable and practicing what is kind of in recent years coalesced in this idea of regenerative agriculture. This is practices such as no-till, cover cropping, properly managed grazing, ways where we can leave the soil life intact, where we can leave soil porosity intact. And especially those of you who perhaps live in the Saginaw Bay area, really the east side of the state, many places in southern Michigan, you have very heavy clay soils where if they are tilled regularly, they will never drain very well. Where if you stop tilling them and allow the natural porosity to redevelop, things like earthworm burrows, the natural microporosity that forms under freezing and thawing through our winter season, all of this allows water to drain into those soils much more effectively. Well, if you're a no-till farmer and you're not contributing to huge runoff in your local county drain, seems to me your drain commissioner could be taxing you differently than your ground pounding neighbors who are eroding, 5-10 tons to the acre. It'd be great if, for example, our Attorney General could issue opinions on such practices and kind of plow the road for the drain commissioners. So there are certainly things that could be done to clarify this authority and to kind of nudge the drain commissioners in that direction. This is one of those famous photographs. If you've ever taken a soil science course, that's a drop of rain hitting wet soil, throwing soil up into the air and detaching those soil particles as part of the erosion process. And really high-speed photography in the 40s and 50s began to really help people understand how the soil erosion process works. In spite of that, it took a very long time for people to decide to do anything about it, but that's another story. But 5 tons to the acre, by the way, is about, the great big pickup trucks, that's about 3 pickup truck loads of soil per acre, per year. You think about that in a county like Allegan, Ottawa, where there's tens of thousands of acres of agriculture, that's a lot of soil. And that really explains the condition of a lot of our rivers and lakes. How do you run for drain commissioner? You form a committee, you pay $100 and you file your reports. It really is that simple in Michigan. You can also collect signatures if you like. There's some good reasons to do that. But it's pretty easy to run for office in the state of Michigan. Probably the better question is who should run? Engineers, farmers, current drain office staff. If somebody in that office is already well familiar with that area and has a pro-climate mindset, that's a great candidate. Natural Resource Conservation Service, that's the USDA's conservation people. Conservation district staff, both very good choices because they're already in touch with your local farm community. Ecologists like Andrew, and frankly, a lot of politicians, once they begin to understand really what a great job drain commissioner is. I mean, it's got its downsides, but man, it's got a ton of power and a lot less hassle than most of our political animals are used to dealing with. There are a number of people who are around the state who have been, for example, state congressional people who've gone on to be rather successful drain commissioners from both of our political parties. So yeah, and yeah, that's about it for Andrew and I. This is our contact information. I know I'm happy to hear from any of you. Let me just say this last thing about the kind of the politics of running for drain commissioner. Drain commissioner office is on a 4-year cycle, and they are elected during the presidential election year. And in some ways, that's kind of unfortunate because there's so much going on in that year that it's hard to get the attention of the voter. But all your voters are coming out. Like those are the most, those are the elections that get the most voters. I would suggest that if things like the citizen, organizations like the Citizen Climate Lobby, like our political parties, other NGOs were to start really taking seriously the promotion of the drain office as a way to address the climate crisis and kind of raise people's consciousness about the importance of this office. I would say it would be great if in, late November of 2022, we were starting to see our 2024 drain commissioner candidates announced. Just to really get out there and try to get, 4, 5, 6 really aggressive drain commissioners in those seats. Frankly, some of them are probably going to get sued, and that's not a bad thing. If they get sued over climate issues and can establish case law that decisively one way or another rules on the power of drain commissioners to do good things for climate, I think that personally, I think that would be great. So with that, I am going to, I guess I will leave this up for a moment, but I guess if people want to unmute and direct questions to either Andrew or I, that would be a good way to proceed, unless someone else wants to manage this portion of our evening.
We actually have someone, Dolly is going to look at what's in the chat. If you've got some questions in the chat first, we'll go that route. Then we can open it up to anyone who may have discussion or questions after that, if that's okay with you guys.
That sounds fine. Thank you.
And I'm just going to bring up the questions chronologically. And the first question came from Mike Jones. It's how much water quality testing is performed on rivers and drains? Is any mandated?
Yeah, boy, there's Andrew and I both being stumped. I don't think the drain office in general is going to do a lot of water quality testing. Our public health departments are doing water quality testing at our public beaches. Typically, our county health departments are also kind of taking the lead on things like public wells and making sure they are tested regularly. So the drain office in general is not doing a lot of those water quality checks. We're not really in the drain commissioner is not in the drinking water business, and unfortunately that's kind of where most of the water testing is focused. Andrew, any comments?
It can vary, but it really depends. I mean, the DNR does some work too when they're monitoring like fish, like because they have a publication they come out with on whether or not you can eat the fish everywhere. So they do a limited testing of public areas that way too. But it really depends. I don't know if there's a short answer as to what areas are, because like if you have like a private lake, it might not be tested at all. If it's not a public body. I mean, they are all public bodies, but if you know what I mean, they're closed off by residential areas. Some of those don't even get hit. So.
Great.
Could I ask a question though? Wouldn't it be just like with COVID that testing would be the place to begin? Pesticides in waters doesn't really matter whether it's a drinking water standard or the other. And frankly, there isn't hardly any data out there about any of that. I would certainly like to see a lot more water quality testing done. It's incredibly expensive. It's like $500 a crack for pesticides and herbicides. So,
well, sure, and there are certainly other tests which are much more affordable. For example, nitrate tests. I mean, that's a simple, dipping a paper in a water sample and reading the color. There is, well, the drain commissioner has a lot of authority to initiate projects and all of that. They are bound by statute for how much they can spend per mile of drain annually. And you rapidly get into the weeds about, some of those details.
Okay. Yeah.
For that reason, the drain commissioner office is not itself typically heavily involved with water quality analysis. They are more going to be focusing on, for example, which people along a drain might be eroding significant amount of soil into the drain, requiring drains to be cleaned out, literally scooped out in order for the water to flow. So they are not really in the business of doing a lot of water quality monitoring per se. What they are going to be more interested in is understanding where sediment is coming from, where it's accumulating, and making sure that the water flows essentially in the public interest. And that runs into issues of flooding and things like that. That said, I don't think there's any reason that a drain commissioner couldn't use the bully pulpit, their influence as kind of a chief environmental officer for a given county. They're certainly the closest thing we have to that, written into our Constitution. So, I don't think there's any reason the drain commissioner couldn't get involved in all of that stuff. However, that would not be typical of that office.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Does
I'm going
Eagle,
to-
oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, does Eagle kind of oversee water quality in Michigan?
They do. I can't really speak to the details of it because it's cooperation with a lot of different agencies that oversee that. But Eagle does have a water monitoring program that they work through the public health departments for.
Yeah, and I think most monitoring is in response to, for example, impaired watersheds. I know when I was with the Conservation District as a professional, I tagged along with some of our watershed technicians. I was not really a watershed technician very much for them. And we would do things like Secchi disc tests, which is a black and white disc, which you sink into the water as deep as you can and still see it. And that gives you an indication of sediment loads. I also participated in the Macatawa watershed with some in-stream monitors, which actually captured sediment, which we then weighed and analyzed in order to then estimate the amount of sediment that was coming down the watershed. And by the way, it was freaking breathtaking how much sediment was coming down that watershed. So there are ways to do this. As with so many things, they are expensive because laboratories are expensive, personnel are expensive. Personally, I think it's more valuable and maybe less intimidating to people to focus on practices. That's really what I focus on when I work with a farmer. Is what practices are you undertaking, and can you make those practices that much more successful? Because we know, for example, if you're a no-till farm with good residue cover, essentially dead bits of plants on top of the soil, you're going to erode a whole whale of a lot less soil than somebody who goes out there in the fall, plows the dickens out of it with a chisel plow and leaves it bare all winter long. So, there are kind of assumptions we can make because of land use planning. We can see on the land and kind of prescribe to our land, our land use, our landowners, if you will, without having to necessarily check their homework all the time. If you're following me, I guess I think it's more important to get those practices out there and worry a little less about whether things are going to change in the watershed. The change will be noted by amateurs driving by if suddenly lakes or streams that have been brown for decades are less brown.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
There are several questions in the chat, and I'm a little concerned about our time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yep, so we've got a question, how many drain commissioners are there in Michigan? And the second part of that question has partially been answered. How does one get to be a drain commissioner?
There's 83.
There aren't quite 83. If you're in low population counties, the duties of the drain commissioner are sometimes assumed by the road commission. I believe there are more like 70 something. But every county will have some kind of person filling the role of the drain commissioner, even if that has been sucked into the road commission. And the question, how do you get to be a drain commissioner? You get elected. It's a popular vote, and it is a partisan office, so you got to pick a team.
Okay, that's very clear. And Jan had a question. Do you know what percentage of farmers are using regenerative practices in Allegan County or any place else in Michigan?
I couldn't pin down a specific number for you. I will tell you, however, that you will often see a statistic, organic farming growing at blah, blah, blah rate per year. I think the regenerative practices are actually moving out much faster than, for example, organic adoption has over the last, 40 years of organic agriculture. For a couple simple reasons, we're not telling these guys to get rid of all their tools. They're still using herbicides. They're still using, doing big time farming. The difference is that I think a lot more of these farmers have been exposed to these ideas really about 10 years ago. That a lot of these ideas really kind of drifted into the mainstream from the organic movement, from other farmers who were more hip to this a long time ago. And where you used to maybe see an article very occasionally in the farm press about these issues, now it's pretty hard to pick up a mainstream farm publication without seeing something related to the regenerative farming movement in there. So I have been pleasantly surprised, occasionally gobsmacked, to hear that Mr. So-and-so is going no-till. People I never thought were going to do these things are switching to them. And kind of the great thing is, you introduce a farmer to a way of farming that saves them money and saves them time. And, all of a sudden they can actually make it to their kid's softball game because they're not out there, plowing the dickens out of everything. They just go plant it after they spray it. This community is primed to accept that kind of change. And the adoption rates have been very favorable. I'll contrast a little bit. If you look at for example, no-till rates in South America, they're much higher than in the United States. Why? Well, because they kind of got started earlier. They had some champions earlier, and once they got going, they really saw a tremendous shift that way, and tremendous value in that no-till farming. And it has stuck. It has really stuck well with, in many areas across the world. I think this is a durable movement. I think it's a movement that is going to, where we're at a real tipping point. And I think particularly if some of our mainstream agricultural groups or our mainstream environmental groups, I think of the Sierra Club in particular, which has had basically a 20-year long tantrum about CAFOs, even they are finally starting to get on board with the kind of the incremental change that actually sells out in the countryside. The Nature Conservancy, about a decade ago, got very serious about placing technicians on the ground in high need areas. A friend of mine down in Van Buren County has been a sponsored technician of theirs for, probably 8-9 years now, and has just made tremendous progress. So I'm actually quite pleased and hopeful about the direction all of that is moving. I think it's offices like the drain commissioner who could kind of take those stragglers and shove them forward into these new things. But the leaders are out there. The second tier leaders are adopting. That third tier is coming along. We really are making a ton of progress out here. I think I'll just stop there.
That's very hopeful. Thank you. The next question was, are there local, state, or federal laws that directly affect private land usage? And then kind of a follow-up to that, I think, is what would be the litigation focus?
Well, I guess the answer to the first one is yes. There's a lot of laws, and you know, and there are a lot of voluntary programs as well that affect our land use. You know, as far as litigation, you know, I think if a drain commissioner started charging people who more for bad farming practices, at some point, some very large farmer with lousy practices will sue them, or maybe Michigan Farm Bureau will sue them. And my attitude to that is bring it. You know, let's nail down the case law tight. I think honestly, the facts and the law are on the side of a drain commissioner. That said, I am not a lawyer, and I probably won't be one anytime soon, but I think if a few of our drain commissioners got kind of aggressive about this, we could sort this out within a couple of years.
That was my question, Mark, because you made reference to suits. So that was exactly what you were making reference to, people who wouldn't go adapt to new practices or better practices. They're going to probably file suit. You know, that's what you meant, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I do expect that, and the drain commissioner is not immune to being sued, but it's not that easy, and the law is pretty kind of firmly in their court, and that's kind of why this office is so spectacularly powerful, because there's just a ton of levers of power sitting in that office waiting for somebody to grab them and put them to good use.
Okay, thank you.
The next question has information in it also, so let me read the whole thing and then you can respond to it. Have you heard about the 30 by 30 plan to save nature? What do you think of this? Here is some more information about the legislation that President Biden supports. Legislators in the House and Senate have introduced two resolutions, Senate Resolution 372 and House Resolution 835, in support of the 30 by 30 plan to save nature by protecting 30% of our lands and waters. The resolution is gaining momentum, but it needs more support. Tell your legislators to sign on to the 30 by 30 plan. So I think the question to you is, have you heard about it and what do you think of it?
Andrew, this is all you.
Yeah, I actually have not heard about this, but interestingly enough, the Environmental Caucus next meeting, we've got someone who's coming to talk to us about a proposed a land preservation program that would be in the UP in Michigan. Sorry, my birds jumping on my head. I want to say that in general, do we need to conserve more land? Yes, absolutely. Because as I said, we're losing wildlife, not just losing it, but we're losing it at mass extinction numbers. We're losing wildlife faster than we've ever lost wildlife in the history of this planet before. So it's quite alarming, and I feel like the bullhorn gets blown constantly, and I feel people have become almost numb to it. But it's still loud and it's still a big deal. I also want to caution, though, that protecting certain areas of land does not guarantee that we're going to solve climate change and we're going to solve the wildlife crisis. It's a good component, but that's not the big picture. So go back to my presentation at the beginning. I mentioned that a change 1.25 miles away from a wetland can have direct impacts on that wetland. So even if you've got that wetland conserved now and you've got that blocked off where that's now safe, you could have changes down the road from it that are still going to impact the wildlife that are living within it. So when we're talking about really big picture solutions, it's also important to make sure that we're considering that this has to be something we're enacting at every level of every planning, of every stage, of every human behavior. Right down to, if you've got a property, what does your property look like? Do you have a monoculture lawn on the front? What kind of wildlife does it support? And that all comes together, and that makes a difference in the long run.
Great, thanks, Andrew.
Can I jump on just for a second? I think that's really a good point, Andrew. I think it's more important to not necessarily just look at our so-called preserved lands, but also to look at, if you've got that 100-acre field and you go from, a bare and chisel plowed wasteland essentially to something where you've got a multi-species cover crop, when in those times when the main crop is not growing there, all of a sudden that is a wildlife bonanza. And if there's 300% more earthworms coming out of that ground every time it rains, that's a wildlife bonanza. And frankly, sometimes our public is so cynical about agriculture. They say, well, if you're not organic, or if you're not this or you're not that, there is a lot of incremental progress that could be made that would not only support our climate goals, but would also support wildlife, would also support public recreation, would help make sure that that wetland down the road isn't overloaded with sediment or atrazine or flooding issues, because more of that land is, or more of that water is staying upland in those farm fields.
Well, apparently this 30 by 30
Thanks,
plan,
Mark.
I didn't know anything.
I'm holistic. Your answer is.
I didn't know anything about this plan until today, but apparently that includes, it would include agriculture land too, being set aside as long as it's under regenerative farming practices. So
Cindy, are these resolutions in Congress or in our state legislature?
I just got it in a Sierra Club newsletter. So
Yeah,
they are bills that have been introduced. Yes. I don't know.
Where, in Congress or in the state legislature?
U.S. Congress, yeah.
Congress, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I heard about it as soon as it was going through the motions. I think that's a great idea, but I definitely think it's a great start. But I think there's definitely a long way to go before we cover all those small things like Andrew mentioned before about the runoff and everything like that. I think it's definitely a good start, but there's definitely more progress for the future.
Okay, we are at 8 o'clock, and I've got one more question here, which I think kind of flows into what we're talking about. Does the Drain Commissioner have anything to do with runoff and pollution coming from CAFOs?
Yeah, CAFO, that's a concentrated animal feeding operation.
Yep.
So that's essentially when you have a lot of animals in a very crammed small space. Does the Drain Commissioner, I don't think that's directly outlined in the responsibilities, but the Drain Commissioner is managing the waters that are flowing from those lands into public areas. And CAFOs, absolutely, they do pollute. They pollute quite strongly. There are areas in Michigan where CAFOs have polluted river water during heavy rain events. It's so dangerous that you're not even supposed to touch the water. Contact with the water, skin contact with the water is considered hazardous for human health, just being in that area. And I'm not going to say that, like, buffer strips and better drain management would necessarily be a golden solution to the problem, but the Drain Commissioner absolutely has a lot that they have power to do to try to handle and help improve that situation.
Thanks, Andrew.
I find myself very conflicted when we start breaking out, when we start talking about farms in terms of large and small. And the reason for that is I know some very large farms, some very large farmers who do an excellent job, who have buffers, who practice no-till, very responsible with their manure management, who may even have drainage water management where they manage the water coming out of their tiles. All of that is possible. I'm not saying it's common, but I'm saying it's possible. I think what is more important, rather than focusing on the size of a farm, is focusing on the practices of those farms. And even when you start drilling down on things like government programs, we had our conservation district meeting the other night for Allegan County, and our natural resources conservation guy started going over local priorities and our opinions about local priorities, because they actually score people's entries when they apply for money from the federal government for conservation programs. And unfortunately, because of the way scoring has been and priorities have been for years and years, they have come to favor things like giant manure pits, paying for a giant manure pit for a big old farm with a manure problem. Now, in a lot of ways, that's a good idea because, you know, they need that pit. They need better storage. That helps them manage that manure in a better manner and helps prevent some of the things Andrew's talking about. However, it can cost $250,000, $300,000, $400,000. My thing is, if we didn't, instead of buying that manure pit, we helped convert, you know, 100,000 acres to no-till, you know, would we be further ahead? You know, I think we would be, and I think there's a lot of deep discussion which could be had about reprioritizing how, for example, federal subsidies support these farms, how crop insurance works. Crop insurance can be a huge impediment, for example, to cover cropping because of the crop insurance rules, which is, you know, it's like one branch of the government over here handing out the, you know, the crop insurance. The other branch is over here, and they're trying to get these guys to cover crop, and now these two are coming in conflict with each other. Solving those simple conflicts and providing our big farms, our small farms, all our farms with a more what I would think is a more field-centric look at our agriculture, not thinking about, you know, big pits and big machines and all that, but figuring about how exactly we're running our fields, so we don't have these big runoffs that Andrew was talking about that make our waters more dangerous. I think that's much more reasonable. There is still a ton that can be done, to improve field practice, which doesn't say to that farmer, hey, you know, you're $5 million of infrastructure on your headquarters, why don't you get rid of that because we hate CAFOs? I mean, this is why the Sierra Club hasn't done squat for decades in this state to get anything done, because they were just like, CAFO's bad, you know, and the farmers were like, well, to hell with you. Why would we even listen to you? You know, because a lot of those guys are pretty good sized farms. I will just say, you know, take dairy farming, for example, it's damn near impossible to make a reasonable lower middle class income with less than 250 cows. It's damn near impossible. And, you know, if we're going to say to our farming public, well, you know, you got to get rid of CAFOs, you know, this 1,000 cow dairy farm, you got to get rid of that. That 1,000 cow dairy farm is, you know, mom and dad and Uncle Bob and a couple of the kids, and that's who's running that 1,000 cow farm. That's still a family farm.
I'm going to interrupt you, Mark.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is really interesting. We want to take a break because there are some people that, because we stop at 8 o'clock, but we do want to, we do want to give opportunity for people to have a discussion, open discussion. And so if we just take a break, I know I just saw Steve Ashmead, he said he had to leave, and there might be some other people because they're used to us stopping at 8.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to extend it. It's not like we want to cut you off, okay? How about if we just take 1 minute break, and anyone that has to leave, fine, and then we'll keep going with this discussion.